is that if she did not judge Christian belief to be more true, more correct, more reasonable than modern atheistic humanism, then she could not be a Christian. One objection it could be possible to present is that isn't it that presupposing that our religious language game, the language game of I would say Christianity, for example, in prayer, especially in rogatory prayer, is correct. God exists because I speak to him. I would reply exactly like Peter Gitsch when he says, I quote him, obviously, we who say this, the claim of faith, I would say, are using our language claim as a basis from which to judge what other people maintain. But anybody is bound to do this if he makes a judgment that other people contest. And by language game here, Gitsch means the language game of Christianity, including, for example, prayer language. It is an answer to neo-Wittgensteinians, especially to D.Z. Phillips. But I think that it can be used in this context. So, of course, when the believer consider his Christian belief more true, more correct, more reasonable than modern atheistic humanism, surely it is inside his language game, I would say, his Christian language game, but as Peter Gitsch, I think that it is acceptable and even inevitable to use our language game as a basis. Surely atheists and theists can avoid getting on the subject of religion and appreciate each other as human beings, and even simply as colleagues in the Department of Philosophy, for example. They may also belong to the same fire brigade. It is an example taken very often by Peter Gitsch, and he borrowed this example from a Polish philosopher, Kotarbiński. So they may also belong to the same fire brigade and do in it a lot of valuable work together, independently of their disagreement on religious matters. They may also have affection towards each other. They may even be in love, or why not? But intellectually, they disagree, and even fundamentally. And such a disagreement is nothing friendly. I mean, as a believer and as an atheist, they are not friends. Also, they may be in other ways. So first, what constitutes a warranted belief with perfect sense for one has no right to be believed, or even perhaps no sense for another. And second, they, the atheist and the theist, are not intellectual peers and cannot consider each other this way. But what does it mean that they are not intellectual peers? I would answer this question by quoting Peter van Inwagen when he says, if someone tells me that if I can adduce no articulable reason for believing in material things, then my belief in material things must be irrational. I will reply that my critique has a mistaken and impossibly demanding theory of rationality. I want to say something similar about my belief in God. Why do I believe in God? Certainly not, answers Peter von Inwagen, certainly not because I can write down some reason for believing in God that would force anyone who understood it to share my belief. There is no such reason. I often do, set out reasons for believing in God, but these reasons are not coercive. A person who understands them and is unmoved by them is not, by that very fact, irrational. Of course, it's, I would say, a very common experience when you are teaching philosophy of religion. You present and you explain, for example, Aquinas' 5 ways, and of course, or Anselm ontological argument, and of course, generally your students, if they are not believer, and in my university, generally they are not, of course they are not convinced at all, but it changes nothing in a sense. Well, so it seems that a believer could always appeal to what could be called a Moorean argument. A Moorean argument, it means a kind of argument that we find used by the English philosopher G.E. Moore, shows that skeptical doubts are always less believable finally than what they serve to raise doubt about. For example, the doubt about the fact that I have 2 hands, it is a Moore example, is less believable than the fact that this is my hand and I show you my hand, and this is another one and I show you the other one. I have 2 hands. A Moorean fact is one we know better than we know the premises of any philosophical arguments to the contrary. So there is an argument saying that the very plausibility of our ordinary beliefs is reason enough for supposing that there must be something wrong in the skeptic arguments or atheist argument when it is the question of the existence of God, even if we are unable to say what it is. So it is possible that in the case of the debate between believer and atheist, we are in a situation analogous to that between the one who claims to know that the things around him exist and the skeptic, like that of Descartes in his first meditation. So in both cases, the atheist and the believer are in the same situation than the skeptic and the one who thinks that the things around him exist. So I think that in fact no true debate is possible in this case. But there are 2 objections. First, this argument seems to immunize all belief, no matter how ridiculous it is. Belief in aliens, or belief in the return of the great pumpkin, belief in some gigantic conspiracy, and so on. Second, the argument refers to common beliefs. However, believing in the existence of God and that Jesus is the Son of God, let alone belief in Mary's virginity or Immaculate Conception, this seems to be not at all ordinary beliefs. So the 2 objections against my argument saying that finally the theist atheist could use a Moorean argument is that a Moorean argument seems to be dangerous in a sense, because all our old crazy beliefs would be immunized against critique. And secondly, it seems that the Moorean argument could be used only for common beliefs, and Christian beliefs would not be common beliefs. My answer is, what seems to the atheists a strong epistemological necessity to justify religious beliefs, and in fact the atheist claims it is impossible, appears to be without any sense, because it is exactly the kind, without any sense for the believer, because it is exactly the kind of beliefs which are not to be justified. The atheist suspects that the believer succumbs to wishful thinking or even intellectual dishonesty, but the theist would say that he does not succumb to wishful thinking and is not intellectually dishonest. But why does the believer adopt such an attitude? Because she believes she received a gift, a grace to believe what she is believing. The atheist seems deprived of this grace. For a believer, religious beliefs are built in him, and even if these beliefs appear extraordinary, irresponsible, and dishonest in the eyes of an atheist, it is because she is an atheist and not because of some epistemological defects of such belief. So my point is that Christian beliefs are not supposed to be acquired independently of a gift or a grace, a relation to God in a sense. And I think that it does not mean that these beliefs are epistemologically problematic, or that they have some epistemological defects. To explain what I mean, I quote Matthew 17:17, and Jesus answered and said unto him, Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed it unto thee, but my Father, which is in heaven. So, flesh, faith is infused by God. 1 Corinthians 12:3, no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit. And of course, St. Anselm, Proslogion, chapter 1, for I do not seek to understand so that I may believe, but I believe so that I may understand. For I believe this also, that unless I believe, I shall not understand. Isaiah 7:9. Well, the idea is that without belief and even faith, no understanding is possible. And it is the reason why, at least in a revealed religion, there can be no epistemic symmetry and parity between the believer and the atheist, and no epistemic parity between the two. The believer prays for the more perfect conversion, and for her more perfect conversion, and for the conversion of the atheist. The atheist thinks that the believer is intellectually blinded, and even as raw, a little bit intellectually vicious. Or even the atheists think the believer does not really believe what she says she believes. She imagines a God, she makes himself believe in all such things on a model of the attitude we are supposed to adopt when we are reading a novel or watching a movie, as the theological fictionalist says. So I think that very currently today, the atheist is tempted to say that finally a religious believer is simply that she imagines certain things and takes seriously the Bible, but in a way that is closely related to the way we are reading a novel, as if we were reading a novel and taking seriously what is fiction, in fact. Well, there could, it would be possible to object to what I said, to what I defended this way. If God is the source of our belief, our own belief in the existence of God and other religious truths, there is an obvious epistemological vicious circle. One believes that God exists, and religious truths that God exists, and we believe religious truths because God is the source of our beliefs that God exists and of these truths. And some philosophers would say that it is a pitiful epistemological attitude and even a form of intellectual blindness, and that this is intellectual vicious. My answer is this time taken in a text, a sermon, in fact, of Jonathan Edwards. He says, "The mind of man is naturally full of prejudices against the truth of divine things. It is full of enmity against the doctrines of the gospel, which is a disadvantage to those arguments that prove their truth and causes them to lose their force upon the mind. But when a person has discovered to him the divine excellency of Christian doctrines, this destroys the enmity, removes those prejudices, and sanctifies the reason and causes it to lie upon the force of arguments for the truth. God, in letting in this light into the soul, deals with man according to his nature and as a rational creature, and makes use of his human faculties. But yet, this light is not the less immediately from God for that. So the faculties are made use of. This as the subject and not as the cause. And that acting of the faculties in it is not the cause, but is either implied in the thing itself, in the light that is imparted, and is the consequence of it. Well, if we accept what Jonathan Edwards says, there is something cognitively wrong with the atheist and other non-theists. She's epistemically flawed, after all, because she rejects, in a sense, a very rational source of religious belief. This is why the friendship between the atheist and the believer has to be based on something other than the recognition of the intellectual symmetry and parity. I mean that if the atheist believes that the theist is blinded, and if the theist believes that the atheist has not received a grace, how could they be intellectually friends? If they can understand and appreciate each other humanly, they are intellectually not only opposed, but even in a sense, enemies. They have no good mutual understanding, leading to a common search for truth on a neutral basis. And I think that this notion of neutral basis is very important. What I say finally is that the problem is that between believer and atheist, there is no intellectual neutral basis. So they can be best enemies, even still able to debate in a sense, but they actually are worst possible friends, because there is something very important between them, and they can appreciate each other humanly, and as I have said, they can belong to the same fire brigade and take a drink together and so on. Of course, they can live together, but there is something which makes a strong difference between them, and it's not very easy to to suppose that it's a secondary, something very marginal, which distinguish them. In the case of disagreement about religious matter, the asymmetry of justification plays a crucial role. They are hidden and undisclosable reasons to believe in God. They are dialectically ineffective because they are the fruits of a divine gift, and even if they can be epistemically effective and above all rationally respectable. So the place of this grace, of this gift, forbids a definition of the atheist and the theist as epistemic peers. If the theist received an intellectual gift from divine grace, atheist and theist are of course not equally likely to be right. The believer benefits from, in a sense, the believer benefits from divine help, and it is exactly what the atheist has not received for reasons I don't know, but he has not received this gift. The very notion of a shareable evidence on which the atheist and the theist could be agreed, and from which they can hope to convince each other, and even simply debate, as if the question was to know the merit of a scientific hypothesis, makes no sense for such a reason in this context. Sometimes philosophers seem to suppose that atheism, agnosticism, and theism are like scientific hypotheses of this kind, to be compared in an academic setting. But if faith, of which belief is a constitutive argument, is not to be attracted by a hypothesis that one finds interesting, simply interesting, but is actually a divine grace and the best possible relation between God and his creatures, the dialectical model of exchanging arguments simply cannot apply. Let us compare. One does not consider someone else to be a peer about one's own headache. In this case, the belief's warrant does not come from a shareable basis between the two disputants. In both cases, headache and religious belief. Beliefs warrant derives from the very fact believe, even if there are no shareable reasons. So it is perfectly reasonable for the theist to downgrade the atheist, even with no independent reason, shareable with the theist. The reference to a headache is not intended at all to suggest that faith is internal and subjective, and therefore it would turn out to be inaccessible to arguments. It is simply to say that our reasons for believing something may not be shareable without being unreasonable. So we could have non-shareable rational reasons to believe in God. The Christian religious belief is thus closer to my belief in the existence, for example, of my own wife, than the belief in the conclusion of a syllogism. But in what way would the belief in the existence of my own wife would be irrational or less rational than the result of a syllogism? So I think that we are closer to this case of my belief that my belief in the existence of my own wife, and I do not believe the existence of my own wife on by the intermediary of a syllogism, but this belief is perfectly, I think, not only rational but reasonable. Would it be friendly or of someone to ask you to give credible evidence of your wife when you start talking to him about her? It would be very strange if I begin to talk about my wife, if someone asked me, well, first of all, you must give me credible evidence that you have a wife and that your wife is alive, or I don't know what. Sure, you could some things, you could sometimes give him or what she asks. However, she could have a level of epistemological requirements so high, the kind that the skeptic can display, that it would make satisfaction impossible. Anyway, it is no more a friendly relationship between interlocutors if you have to give a proof of the existence of your wife when you speak about her. Rather, if you have to give such a proof, there is a strong disagreement between people who do not share much intellectually, even if they can, of course, respect each other and even, I say, appreciate each other. But we haven't to give such proofs about the existence of God, even if we eventually could, because we do not believe in God apart from God himself, and according to proofs we have of God's existence. And we don't have to check revealed truth independently to revelation, and even it makes absolutely no sense. We could compare with the belief in the existence of a planet, because it is the best possible explanation of certain astronomical phenomena where proof is needed. In this case, proof is needed, or at least testimony related to someone, a scientist, who have such a proof. So in the case of the existence of God, and the same for the existence of my own wife, we are not at all in the same case that the belief in the existence of a planet. Because in this case, of course, we have to give reasons. But in the two first cases, we have not to give reasons. So this is the reason why we can have very serious doubts about the possibilities that the disagreement between atheists and theists could be dispelled by an exchange of arguments based on intellectual friendship. But that does not mean that religious belief is a subjective, I would say Kierkegaardian passion that would ridicule any rational theology, and especially natural theology. However, the function of natural theory and rational theology, of natural theology, it's not theory, but theology, the function of natural theology and rational theology is not foundational. They do not serve to give a rational basis to the theist beliefs. And you have this painting by Philippe de Champagne, The Supper at Emmaus. When Jesus revealed himself to the disciples, he does not give arguments, he's simply in presence. Indeed, we can rationally believe without having shareable reasons, such as those that we share in philosophical or scientific debate. So my conclusion would be taken in 1 Corinthians 2:15. But he that is spiritual judges all things, yet he himself is judge of no man. This quotation explains what makes intellectual friendship between the believer and the unbeliever so difficult. The truly difficult question for the theist is not that a hidden God, is not that of a hidden God, but why God does not extend his grace to all mankind, and why the atheists, intellectually honest and even perhaps generous, disagrees with him.